Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Alaska Fast NSF SBIR Project Pitch Workshop. Today, we are going to learn how to draft a pitch, and we have our expert consultant, Jim Greenwood, to explain us the process. Two things before we kick off. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and as soon as we finish each section, we will be addressing those questions. So please put your questions in the chat, and we will address them when we complete each section. The second thing is, this is a recording meeting, so if you have an issue with that, please just turn off your cameras. And having said that, thank you for joining us. And Jim, you have the floor.
All right, appreciate it, Evelyn. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really afternoon. I'm on the East Coast here, so you guys are just getting into your afternoon. I'm well into my afternoon. I'm almost into happy hour here. So let me share slides. And Evelyn, were the slides sent out to folks? Have they got them in advance there?
Yes, the attachment was part of the event, but I can follow up with an email as well.
Okay. All right. All right. So again, if you don't have these, you will shortly as a PDF. I'm going to take my picture down because that'll give me more bandwidth. I don't know if anyone else suffers bandwidth issues like I do, but that'll make sure that we devote it to the materials rather than to looking at myself here. So let me see if I can. I've got part of my problem is I just finished doing something on Teams, and now I'm doing Zoom, and I've got to get the brain to transition from one to the other here. So our topic today then is going to be on the project pitch for National Science Foundation, a very important requirement for anyone that wants to submit a proposal under the SBIR STTR programs to that agency. I want to start though with some fairly basic information, and just again wondering, ahead of time, how many folks would already be pretty well versed on SBIR, those that be new to the programs. So I want to spend a couple slides just on background. Those of you that are already quite astute in SBIR STTR, then that'll be review and maybe learn a few new things because the programs are constantly changing. And I appreciate your indulgence while we bring the newcomers up to speed here. So if I were asked Greenwood in one slide, define SBIR, this would be pretty much how I would do it. SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. It provides over $4 billion a year, non-recourse contracts and grants made to small U.S.-owned companies to develop new products and services for sale to agency, to governments, industry, and/or consumers that are based on innovative and proven concepts and technologies. So the key points, it's a substantial amount of money, at least by our small business standards, right? I know the federal government measures everything in trillions these days, but you and I as small companies, when you talk billions, that's certainly going to get your attention. And this is a growing program. It was about $3.5 billion a few years ago, so it has grown considerably in recent years. They make SBIR awards both as contracts and grants. You go, what's the difference? Actually, there's a substantial difference between the two. We can talk a bit more about that, but NSF is a grant program, meaning basically they come to you and say, well, what do you want to work on? What is the project? What is the interest that you want to pursue? Whereas contracts, they tend to come to you and say, here's the problem that we, the federal government, are having with a particular program or vehicle or whatever it may be. And can you fix the problem? Do you have a creative solution to the problem? So contracts are problem oriented. Grants are, if you will, good idea oriented. Non-recourse means SBIR, you don't repay the money, you don't give up equity for the money. So two things you ought to like about SBIR is non-repayment and no sacrifice of equity. Got to be small, fewer than 500 or fewer employees. Everybody fit okay? yeah, it's not going to be a whole lot of folks that are not going to fit that definition. That's it. In terms of small, it's not some complicated definition like SBA sometimes gets into with other programs. It's just 500 or fewer employees. Got to be U.S. owned, but it's a simple majority ownership, so we can have up to 49% ownership by non-U.S. citizens, and you could still qualify for SBIR. The purpose of SBIR, many people don't recognize this. The purpose is actually to do something quote unquote useful with that innovative research that you're doing in SBIR. And that something useful is basically developing products and services. It can be improvements to existing products and services in some agencies. Other agencies are really looking for new products and services. And I would say that NSF falls into the latter category. They're not real interested in improvements or enhancements to existing products, but really development of new products and services. Now, some of that can just be, in my opinion, a difference in how you word it. You can talk about something as a improvement to an existing product, or you can talk about the existing product being terminated and a new product coming in its place. And it could really be pretty much the same thing, in my opinion. Who are you going to sell the product or service to? Pretty much anybody you can think of. Doesn't matter. It can be in some agencies like the military, they actually want to be your customer, so you'd be selling back to your SBIR agency. NSF's not going to buy your products or services from you, so they're not going to be your customer. But other branches of the government, federal government, state government, local government could be customers. Certainly industry and or even individual consumers can be customers. The point again is that you take the results of your SBIR and you do something quote unquote useful with it in terms of putting it out and making it available to solve problems and meet needs. And SBIR needs to be based on innovative, unproven concepts. People screw this up all the time in their proposals. They don't describe what's innovative about their approach to a problem or how they're going to solve an issue or take advantage of an opportunity. So you need to be clear about what's different outside the box with your idea. Very important to NSF. I have been on a number of NSF, SBIR, STTR review panels, and that is one of the most common discussions that will be held by the panel will be, is this really innovative or not? Or is this innovative enough to make it justified for SBIR support? And unproven, and this throws people off because, you know, we're all used to writing proposals to potential customers that say, we know how to do this, we're expert in this, this is our, you know, this is our expertise, we know how to do this, we've done it for other clients, we'll do it for you. You don't want to say that in SBIR. You want to say, basically, we have got an idea that is so different, so unusual, so unique, so innovative. We don't know if it's going to work or not. We don't know if it's going to solve the problem. We don't know if it's going to be a superior solution to others. That unknown factor, that unprovenness, is actually what justified the creation of SBIR as a program in the first place. I would add to that in the text box down below for NSF, can't be incremental or logical modification of something that is already done, some already known, whether it be an innovation or a product. So you got to be careful again that you don't present your project as just an improvement over something that already exists. And this is their terminology, needs to be revolutionary or transformational. And I have no idea why I have two B's there on that second item, but the point is they don't want, again, incremental improvement. They want something really outside the box, something that really changes how this problem is addressed or how this opportunity is exploited. So if that's SBIR, what's this STTR thing? I mean, we could spend the whole webinar just talking about those differences, but in a nutshell, this is the major difference in my opinion. SBIR allows you to subcontract some of the money. STTR mandates it. So SBIR, we can subcontract some portion of the contract or grant to another entity, including nonprofits like universities. STTR requires that we sub at least 30% of the project to a nonprofit, and that nonprofit 90% of the time is going to be university, probably 7% of the time is going to be a federal lab, and the other 3% is going to be some sort of independent nonprofit. SBIR, STTR both organized into 3 phases. Phase 1 is where you take that unproven technology and prove it works. Limited amount of money. NSF right now about $275,000 to do that, and agencies vary between about 2 and 12 months. NSF leans towards the 12-month duration on that, but it's not a lot of money. It's not a lot of time. So one thing you want to be careful is when you scope your phase 1 project, starting in the project pitch, don't over propose it. Don't claim to do too much in phase 1 because there's just not the resources to do it. And you might say, well, geez, 275 is a lot of money. Yeah, but it isn't by the time you take out fee or profit, and by the time you take out some indirect costs, you're probably down to maybe 150 for the amount of money that you have. And again, that's not going to go very far. Phase 2 then is if phase 1 proves that it works, it's feasible, then phase 2 is starting to really develop the innovation. We can now measure money from the agencies in millions rather than tens or hundreds of thousands, and not unusual for 18 months to 2 years in phase 2. And then phase 3 is that take it to the marketplace. Again, do something useful with it. Don't stop at the end of phase 2 and present a paper at a conference and write a journal article, but instead put it out into the marketplace so that it can be used usefully. And NSF, the project pitch we're focusing on today, comes back here before you do the phase 1. You cannot even submit the proposal for the phase 1 until you've done this pitch. Again, contract versus grant we've talked about. And in terms of who's contract and who's grant, and kind of give you the idea of where NSF stands in the SBIR world. DOD is by far the biggest agency in SBIR STTR, and it's contract agency. It's all about problem solving at the military. Then you got Department of Health and Human Services, or as I usually refer to it, National Institutes of Health, Department of Energy, and then NSF is kind of the 4th largest agency in SBIR, and it, along with DOE and NIH, are grant agencies. When proposals are sought, NSF, unlike most agencies that give you deadlines, NSF gives you windows of opportunity. So the current window at NSF opened on March 2nd and is open through July 5th. Simple interpretation is you can submit a project pitch anytime between now and July 5th. Or if you've already got the pitch approved, you can submit a proposal anytime between now and July 5th. Now, there's no real advantage to submitting a proposal early. I think there is an advantage to submitting a pitch early, and we'll talk about that as we go forward here. But again, the current window is open through July 5th. I would treat that July 5th as at least as a soft deadline in your planning for when you want to get your project pitch submitted is prior to July 5th. And I'll try to explain why as we go along here. STTR deadlines similar to SBIR deadlines. NSF is one of 3 agencies, SBIR agencies, that requires some communication with them prior to submitting the phase 1. The others are Department of Energy and National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. NSF is the only one that uses the project pitch that we're looking at today. This is relatively new. It's been around, well, it's now 3-4 years. Here's the problem that NSF face. They will accept a proposal on any topic. And when they do that offer, then they get proposals from anybody and everybody about all sorts of things. And they just got overwhelmed. They found, though, as they were wading through all of those proposals, that a lot of the proposals were not the kind of things they wanted to fund. They wanted to fund things that met two criteria that we'll talk about, and I'll state them now. They want things that have high technical risk and that have great commercialization potential. So NSF wants to fund highly risky, from a technical standpoint, projects and those with high commercial potential. And they were reviewing all these proposals, and they were not for risky for undertaking, or they were for projects that were very minimal in terms of commercialization potential. So they came up with the idea of creating the project pitch, where you would submit almost an executive summary to them, which would allow them to see the project in basic format and determine whether it meets the high risk and commercial potential criteria. If it does, then they would invite you to submit the full proposal. If it didn't meet that, then they would ask you to either go away, they'd be polite about it, of course, or just simply rethink your project and see if you can redefine it in a way that it's more technically risky and or has higher commercialization potential. That's what I mean by their breadth. Glenn up there, who's now left as one of the program officers at NSF, I loved his quote. You know, we fund almost anything that's a high quality project, and almost anything means we'll fund almost anything in these broad 30 topical areas. So you got things like materials, high performance computing, medical, space. Most people think it's NASA that's interested in space. Some people think about the military now getting involved in space. NSF has now said they want to be involved in space development. Cybersecurity, big area and of great interest to them. Those of you that might be interested in education, it turns out NSF funds a lot of things in education under the learning and cognition technologies topic. And frankly, if you can't stick it under one of the other 29 broad topics, they tell you just to send your proposal under other, and they'll figure out where to put it. They will identify a hole in one of the other 29 topics where your project will go. The 29 topics and even other are described in this document that you can pull down off the internet. You got the URL there at the top of the page. And this will give you a descriptor, example here of mobility, a descriptor what they mean by mobility. I will tell you the definitions are sometimes more helpful than others. And it only defines the broad mobility topic. It doesn't define the narrower subtopics, as you see down below, the behavioral, hardware, and so on. I find that frustrating because they want you to specify what topic and subtopic you think your project might fit under. Well, it's a little hard to know without a little descriptor. What do they mean by infrastructure and flow as opposed to a resiliency project in terms of mobility? And where do you finally just find that you fall under M6 down there? But at least they do offer you some descriptions. This tells you if you submit under other topics, it's basically to be done when you don't have any idea what 29 topics it might fit under. You submit it under other, and they'll assign it to one of the 29. So again, the problem at NSF that they faced was their open arms, 30 topics, submit your ideas, we'll consider anything. Everybody and his mother was submitting a proposal. They even limited it to one proposal per company per submission window. They still got overwhelmed and still found themselves with so many proposals that just didn't meet their criteria. So they created the project pitch so that you will be invited to submit a phase 1 proposal only if you meet the 2 criteria, which are shown here under narrowness. And again, those are, I'm using their terminology, revolutionary with high technical risk. So this is not a trivial project. It's not something that's slam dunk that's going to happen. And if it does work, it's going to have great opportunity in the marketplace. There's great potential for it. All right, so again, the pitch exists to try to narrow down the number of proposals they get, and per my bottom bullet there, it takes less time for NSF to review probably 10 of these pitches than it would take to review one proposal. So they figure they can really work down their or reduce their workload by getting a whole bunch of project pitches, scan through them pretty quickly, and eliminate some that just are suggesting projects that would not be appropriate given their criteria of high risk and commercial potential. So here's how you start with NSF. You prepare this pitch, you submit it via their website, and you wait. And that wait can be anywhere from about 6 hours, I think is the least amount of time I've seen, or it can be in excess of a month. And you don't really know in advance which it's going to be. Some people think, oh, well, I got an immediate response. They must have thought it was a great idea. Well, some of the NSF program officers who are over these 30 topics, some of them obviously don't really like this pitch idea. And so they're just kind of rubber stamping pitches. You submit a pitch and you could have written Mary Had a Little Lamb for your project pitch, and they would have approved it because they're just rubber stamping them. There are others, program officers, who believe in this system and they're spending some time on it. They tend to take longer than 6 hours, obviously. And then there are those that really are just not on top of things. They're behind schedule, they're behind the 8 ball, and they might not get to your project pitch for weeks. And when they do, they spend 15 or 20 minutes and rubber stamp it. So you're getting all sorts of feedback from the agency. And I tell you that not to badmouth NSF, but to manage your expectations, if you will. I have people that when they get a project pitch approval to submit their full proposal, they think that's the green light, that their idea is highly regarded by NSF, and they're just chomping at the bit to fund it. That might be the case, but I think in many instances, it's not the case. It's simply, you got through this hurdle. You may have gotten through it because someone just rubber stamped it, or you might have gotten through it because someone who really poured over your project pitch thought it was a good idea. You really won't know, frankly, at that stage what you got. Although I think, again, it's a pretty good indication. If they respond to you in 6 hours, it's probably the rubber stamp situation. So what goes into the pitch? Basically, there are 5 sections to the pitch. The first is just your basic demographics: name, address, phone number, so on. Then the R&D or technical innovation section, followed by technical objectives and challenges referring to the phase 1 project. Then the commercialization focus, because again, remember, that's one of their criteria that they want to use to decide which proposals they want to see and which ones they don't. And then finally, a description of the company and team. So if you're adding consultants, subcontractors, they want to know who else is on the team besides the company itself. And combined, not to exceed about 1,500 words, broken down by sections 2 through 5. In more detail, again, basic demographics, it's name, address, phone number, but they do want to know who is the right person to contact in your company if they've got questions about your project pitch. I'm seeing more project pitches coming back from the NSF program officers, directors with questions. And so it's becoming even more important that you are clear who is the right person for that, and don't make it a figurehead or a clerical support person. Have it be the best, who you think would be the best person either to answer the question or to get the answer to the question. Then the innovation is basically what's innovative about this, what's different about this, what's unique about this, why is this something when NSF wants to fund revolutionary and transformational ideas? Why does this fit that definition? So you want to have a pretty good sales pitch here, and not to exceed 500 words of, here's what's innovative about what we're proposing. Now, it's not called out in the instructions, but in my opinion, what precedes that description of the innovation is some brief statement of the problem. What is it that you're solving? What is the need out there, or what is the opportunity that you're exploiting? So there needs to be something that kind of sets the stage as to here's where this project goes. You know, right now, prostate cancer is an extremely deadly and aggressive type of cancer. We have an and it is the second largest killer of men in the country. You know, some sort of statement like that that really sets the stage for why this project needs to be undertaken. Then you would go into the innovation. We have determined that we believe there is a part of the DNA that will give an early indication of whether prostate cancer is likely to inflict an individual. You know, something like that that now puts the innovation out there, but puts it in the context of the problem. So you don't want to just, in number two, you don't want to just start talking innovation. You want to talk problem and then the innovative solution you've got to that problem. 500 words, not to exceed again. Number three then is, okay, so you got this problem, you got an innovation. What is it you don't know is going to work? You know, this is where, and I think a lot of people play that down, but NSF actually wants you to play it up. It wants you to say, we'll be darned if we're clear what part of the DNA will do that. Or we're not sure if it's the same for white males as it is for Native American males. You know, something about what's unclear out there and is important to the project being a success or not, particularly commercial success. So what is the, you know, what's the unknown or unknowns, and how will you overcome those unknowns? How will you find out the answer in phase one? And remember, phase one limited to not to exceed 12 months and not to exceed $275,000. How will, in phase one, you have reduced the risk of and the unknownness of your innovation? So even though it doesn't say so in part number three, this is really focused on phase one, not what you're going to go on and do later in phase two, but what are you going to accomplish in phase one? Section 4 then is, okay, what's the market here? What, you know, who is it that has the problem, the pain points? How would you describe them? Do you have any idea how many there are? Do you have any current customers? You know, anything that gives a indication to NSF that there is a market out there for this technology, for the innovation. So we might, in my simple example, we might talk about the number of cases of prostate cancer discovered annually, trends and how that's going to increase over time because of the aging of the population. What fraction of those it's serious enough that would warrant using your technology? You know, just some data that starts showing that you're thinking like a business person, not just thinking like a technologist, but thinking like somebody that understands the market and how a product works and the need to meet a need of a customer. By the way, if you've been involved in I-Corps, this is a place to tout that you have gone through that process. Those of you not familiar with I-Corps, this is it was an NSF initiative, not an SBIR, but outside initiative of NSF, where they would team a technology or technologist and a entrepreneur and a mentor, and this team would work to determine whether there was a product opportunity related to that technology that they were working on. And a lot of that was done through customer discovery, meaning going out and knocking on doors and talking to potential customers, potential competitors, suppliers, funders, anyone that would be involved in the commercialization of that technology. I-Corps has been very successful, very well respected. And obviously NSF very proud of creating it in the first place. So if you can tell NSF SBIR office that you have already participated in NSF's I-Corps program, then obviously they like to hear that. And then finally, section 5 is just the description of the company. You know, how long have you been in business? Are you, is it kind of a dormant business, or have you been actively pursuing it for some time? What about your capabilities in terms of technology related to this proposal? But also, what about your commercialization capabilities? And if that latter category, the commercialization capabilities, you really don't have those at this point, that's fine. I think it's important in this 5th section to say so and to indicate a plan for getting those resources. So you can indicate that, you know, the company has been really focused on its technical work because of the need to advance the technology, but we recognize by halfway through the phase 1, we would need to be bringing in someone who could be preparing the business plan and analyzing the market in greater detail. You know, something that shows you recognize the importance of the business commercialization side of the project. And even though you don't have anybody right now to do that, you've got a plan for doing so, for bringing them in. Evelyn, why don't I've been going on here for some time. Why don't I pause here and see if we have any questions that we might address before we go too far?
Yes, and we do have one question, and it's more of a explanation on what is high technical risk. And I also want to encourage people, if you want to put in the chat, what is your innovation or what is that you are trying to pitch to NSF in just a couple of sentences, we can share in the group and get feedback. So yes, Jim, what is high technical risk? I mean, more details on that.
Yeah, okay, good question. And tongue in cheek, I could say it's higher than low level technical risk, right? But the problem is there's no clear definition of it. And let me give you an example of how different it can be. If you think you figured out how to make nuclear fusion a viable energy source, and you've got a 1 in 1,000 chance of your idea working, NSF might just go with you on that, because even though the chances are so slim of it working, the payoff is so huge that I can see them rolling the dice, if you will, and seeing if we get lucky, and maybe we just, you know, you get that chance. On the other hand, if you've got something that's I hate to call it mundane, but something more routine, and you've got a 1 in 1,000 chance of solving the problem, then they're not going to be very interested in that. That's just going to be way crazy. We're just throwing money away at 1 in 1,000 chance. So if it's more mundane, maybe we're looking for we've got a 50% chance of this working, as opposed to failing. So I think that'd be one of the variables that would certainly look at. I think there's also the question of what's the downside of failure. You know, there's one thing, and again, this sounds a little odd perhaps, but there's not a big immediate downside if you don't have the cure to prostate cancer. I mean, it's a terrible disease and it needs to be addressed. But, you know, we've had cancer a long time in this society, and no one has come up with the perfect answer. And if you don't have a perfect answer, that's okay. It's not going to mean the difference between being able to get out of bed tomorrow, at least not for most of us. On the other hand, if you've got something where this is literally a matter of the future survival of society as we know it, well, now we've got a real important risk that's facing us, and we've got to be, I think, looking at something that's not going to be so risky as a solution to that. Now we could argue, I guess, if they get multiple proposals on that really critical, and we could use, and I'm sure there'll be some debate about this, we could use global warming as an example of that. And some would say, boy, if we don't solve this, the world as we know it is gone. So we've got to find a solution. Well, one answer is, if you got a solution that's not real risky, then they might go for that because they need a solution. On the other hand, if none of the solutions are low risk, then they might try to fund a dozen different high risk solutions, hoping that one of the dozen high risk solutions will work out. So again, I'm not giving you a real simple black and white answer on the what's high level risk here, but it's, and let me put one more spin on that if I can. In part, it's how can you describe it in your project pitch and ultimately in your proposal so that it doesn't sound like a trivial risk. Proposal I was reviewing earlier today did a poor job of this. They basically said, well, there's a little bit of risk in doing such and such, but it's real likely we can overcome it because we've done it with similar data sets. Well, that really doesn't do a good job selling NSF on this being a high risk project when you've said it really isn't all that risky and you've solved the problem in other areas. So that's not a good sales pitch whatsoever. So can you take that, and the challenge I gave to that particular client was, you don't want to lie about it, but if you can describe the risk and be more descriptive of the risks that are involved, then the reviewer could conclude there really are some substantial risks involved, and it's not such a slam dunk. Another way of saying that is, did the writer of that proposal intentionally minimize the risks that are being faced, as opposed to trying to be more direct and blunt about what the risks are? And I'm hoping, if that's the case, now that they know that NSF wants to see risk, that they could rewrite that proposal and show a much higher level of risk than they did in the original description. All right.
We have two comments in the chat, and
Okay.
one is just kind of a quick pitch. A participant has an idea of developing a laser gun, another one of early wildfire detection, and another one in next generation heat exchangers. And I think that I would like to ask you is, how can they demonstrate that their idea is innovative, risky, and present that to NSF? Obviously, you don't have the background of the technology, but explaining similarly to the context of what they like to see, we can talk about it as an example.
Okay. Good question. I would add a couple of things to it. One is, and again, a lot of this comes back to, what do you say? A very common mistake, and I was telling some other folks this earlier today, a real common mistake is you just assume the reviewer can figure it out. So you just kind of say, well, we've got a new laser and these are the characteristics of the laser, and you're thinking any reviewer that knows anything about lasers can see how this is a better laser. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to trust the reviewer to figure it out, or that the reviewer is alert enough while they're reviewing your pitch or your proposal to figure it out, or that they have the background to figure it out. Sometimes you get a generalist as a reviewer, and you don't want them, relying on them to try to figure it out. So instead of that, you say, this is our laser, and this is what makes it different. And you make a blunt and hopefully compelling statement of why it's different. Now, different than what? Different than what could be the state of the art, either technically or state of the art in terms of what's out there on the market right now. So you may have a there may be other lasers that have some of the same capabilities that yours has, but they're not on the market because they'd be too expensive. They require a material that's restricted in its dissemination. They require too much expertise or training to operate. You know, it could be that you have technological superiority, or you've got superiority in the product potential of your laser. So that, and again, you don't want to just assume the reviewer would figure that out. You'd want to explain that to them. So I think those are some of the things I would do in terms of, you know, what's innovative. By the way, NSF does not have a real good definition of innovative, except liking to use these terms, robust and transformational. They use those quite a bit. So if you were to describe, I'm sorry, not robust, but revolutionary and transformational, use those terms. If you can use those terms in a way to describe why your laser is better and what is revolutionary about it, that would be helpful, because again, those are terms that NSF likes to see in describing the projects that they're going to fund. You also may say, and this is another approach, and you got to be careful, because you could come up with a definition that doesn't meet this high risk element that they've got to it. But you could say, in my opinion, innovation means, and then lay out your definition, you know, that you are, or you could say innovation includes taking existing technology and using it in ways that have never been used before. And based on that, here's how my project is innovative. The danger in doing that with NSF is they don't like to see incremental improvement or modification of proven concepts. So you'd have to be very careful that in your definition of innovation, that you're not telling them basically that this fits their definition of what they don't want to fund. So you wouldn't want to say that we're just going to take a proven technology in one field and adapt it to a new field, because that pretty much fits NSF's definition of what they're not going to fund. So again, I'm not giving you kind of black, white, yes, no. Hopefully you can see some of the issues that are involved in determining, is it risky? Is it innovative? Is this something that NSF wants to see? But frankly, at the end of the day, you take all of this and do the best you can putting together a pitch, and you shoot the pitch in there, because that's the purpose of the pitch. Is let's see if NSF agrees with you that it's high risk, and agrees with you that it's really innovative and transformational. Make your best case for those things, but let's see what they have to say when they come back and either give you an invitation or not on your pitch. All right. Well, let's talk for a minute about what you might see when you submit your pitch. You submit it, and it could be anywhere from a few hours to weeks before you get a response. You will get a response in one of three categories. It will either be a rejection, an acceptance, or other. Rejection means they have concluded that your idea is, in their opinion, not highly innovative, and or does not include significant technical risk. Now, an example that I was dealing with earlier today, and I can't give you a lot of details without violating a client's proprietary information here, but their idea was very innovative. It's very different how they're approaching a problem, but they've already done, I would guess, probably 80% of solving the problem. So it was highly innovative, but they've already taken most of the risk out of it. So they are writing a project pitch, which basically says, so all we need you to do, NSF, is fund a couple little things we got to do that really aren't that risky, and we already know what we're going to do if we have a problem. And that, to me, is a recipe for rejection from NSF because it's no longer highly risky. It's very innovative, but it's not highly risky. They may also reject it not because it doesn't sound like a really innovative, risky project, but because they just don't see the market, or they don't see a big enough market. Now, they don't define for you how big the market has to be, but let me put it this way. NSF likes to see projects that have the potential to go big, to be venture capital type deals, to become, well-known brand names, large companies. That they like to fund that sort of thing. So you don't want to come in with something that is just going to be limited to a very small market. An example of that, and this is used quite often, is when you come in and say, well, the market for this is electronic engineering faculty in larger universities. And you go, okay, so how many of those are there out there? And maybe there's a few hundred. Well, and NSF looks at that and says, well, but that's not going to be a big hit. I mean, you're going to make a little money off that, but not very much. And maybe the project is such that it doesn't require ongoing training or consumables, materials, anything like that. And they just conclude that's just not much of a market opportunity. Third category of rejection is they just don't get it. I mean, and I get these projects sometimes where the people are so, and I'm not quite sure, are they that brilliant or that far off the wall that they can't explain it to a normal person. It's just they're kind of out in nth dimensional space in their thinking of the world, and they can't come down to earth and say, okay, Greenwood, a humanoid would say this is X, or we're going to do Y. So we occasionally see that project pitch where the NSF staffer just said, I don't get it. I can't figure out what the heck these people are doing. Rejected if you're ineligible, so you're a nonprofit, or you're not primarily U.S. owned, or you're not a small company, you're a university. Any of those sort of issues would lead to rejection. Even though it's rejected, though, that doesn't mean the end of the pike necessarily. If you think the reasons for rejection can be overcome, you can revise and resubmit the project pitch in the next window. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. So that's the worst case, is rejection. Best case is acceptance. Wow, interesting project. We like it. Looks interesting. You're invited to submit your phase 1 proposal. Again, some of those are because they think it's a great idea, and some of those are because they're rubber stamping project pitches. You do have 1 year from that date of receipt of that invitation to submit your phase 1 proposal. So the clock ticks based on the date of the invitation. So whatever that date is, figure 1 year from then you can do it. If you don't do it within that year, then you would have to resubmit the pitch and get a new invitation before you can submit the phase 1 proposal. Now, in the old days, and again, they've only been doing this since 2019, but in the old days, these acceptance emails would start after saying you're invited to submit your phase 1 proposal. It would start with a nice paragraph with some advice that they have about your project based on their review of your project pitch. I'm not seeing those nice one paragraph of advice. What I'm seeing is boilerplate. And in the old days, what they would do is they give you one paragraph of something specific to your proposal in the way of advice, and then they'd give you boilerplate. Well, now they don't give you the specific to your proposal advice. They just give you the boilerplate. So the boilerplate is going to remind you to emphasize the level of risk, emphasize the innovative nature of the project, emphasize the commercial potential, just stuff that is important, but they're saying the same thing to everybody. Number three, the other alternative between rejection and acceptance, I'm seeing more of these of late. And what it is they'll come back, the NSF will come back and say, I need more information about your innovation, or I need a better explanation of the qualifications of your PI. And so they're not saying we're rejecting your pitch. We're saying we don't have enough information about some aspect of your pitch to make an intelligent decision and give you an invitation or a rejection. I think this is good because if you get a rejection, as I said earlier, and I'll show you an example here in a little bit, you get a full rejection, you cannot resubmit, revise and resubmit the project pitch until the next window. So if you submit today a project pitch and it gets rejected, then you're sitting here on the 27th of April and you're going to be sitting on your hands until the 6th of July before you can revise that pitch and resubmit it. So I think number three, kind of the soft rejection, is trying to prevent from putting people into that situation of having to sit on their hands for literally months waiting for another opportunity. So they'll say, you know, we don't like, or we don't understand what your innovation is. In 500 words or less, explain it. And they'll give you that opportunity to submit that additional explanation. One thing you do get out of this, whether you get 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the outcome, is you finally, at this stage, when you get this response, you will know who it is at NSF who is working on your proposal, was working on your pitch. You'll have a name associated with it. Up to this point, it's real likely you have no idea who in NSF is reviewing your pitch or giving you consideration. But at this point, you will, because the email will come from an individual at NSF. That is someone now, not only is it someone you can have a little bit of a dialogue with, particularly if you got an acceptance or you got the soft rejection request for more information, it's not only someone you can have that dialogue with, this individual is, as I wrote down there, they're God. And the reason why I'm calling them God is they're the ones who ultimately are going to decide who wins and loses NSF, SBIR, STTR grants. I told you earlier, I'm a reviewer for NSF. I am advisory to God. So this program officer comes to me and says, Greenwood, what do you think of this proposal? And I give them my comments. They take my comments along with comments of other people who review for them, and then they decide what they want to do. And frankly, they could very well completely ignore my comments if they don't think I was looking at it straight, or they don't like my perspective, or whatever the reason, they can completely ignore what I said. So the program officer who's going to send you the response to your project pitch is ultimately going to pick winners and losers when it comes to proposals. They're God, treat them as such. So, you know, don't insult them, don't be derogatory to them, don't make their lives miserable by bugging them constantly. You know, show a little courtesy and respect, which you should anyway, but particularly important because if you irk them, then that's going to grossly limit your chances of getting an award for SBIR or STTR at NSF. I mentioned this point earlier, so I won't go into it again, but I think you're getting anywhere from some rubber stamping project pitches all the way to some who are putting some serious time into the review of your pitch, and anywhere in between. I think the timing of submitting your pitch does matter. Now, NSF tries to play this down in their solicitation. They tell you that you can submit your pitch anytime. It doesn't matter, you just submit it anytime. Well, that's not really true, because you can only submit, as I said earlier, one pitch per NSF window. So if you submit before the end of the current window, that's a lot better than not submitting until the start of the next window. And let me try to show that graphically here. So here's 2023. And let's say, here we are, and you decide the middle of May, you submit a project pitch to the NSF, and let's just say it gets rejected. They don't quite understand it. They've got some issues with it. Okay, so you're going to have to sit on your hands until July 6th. So, you got a little shy of 2 months. So that's unfortunate, but you can at least be revising it. You can be talking to the program officer and getting some guidance on a revision. But the alternative is, if you didn't submit the pitch until, say, the 17th of July, after the current window closes, guess what? If they reject that pitch, you cannot resubmit it until after November, or after early November. So you got what? You got about 4 months, over 4 months that you're going to have to wait if you do that. So it's a lot better, in my opinion, if you submit your pitch between now and July 5th than it is to wait until after July 5th and then submit it. It keeps the ball moving better than if you wait until after the current window closes. Another rule about the pitch, you can't submit a new pitch or an additional pitch until they act on the previous one. So it's kind of one active pitch at a time. So you got to wait until they take whatever pitch you put in and give you a rejection or an acceptance on it and get that resolved. That means then you really can't submit one pitch on the last day of the current window, say July 5th, and then submit another pitch on the 6th of July. You couldn't do that and have two pitches active at one time. Now, the exception to that is I put in my bullet down there. You could do that only if, when you submitted on the 5th of July, they came back literally within hours with a rubber stamp approval or rejection. Then I guess you could put it in the next day, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And also avoid pitching what NSF says it doesn't want. So the language that they use, NSF uses in its solicitation, as you see there, is project activities not responsive to the solicitation. And that's just a convoluted way of saying, this is what we don't want to see in your pitch. We don't want to see in your proposal. So first one, evolutionary development, incremental modification of established products or proven concepts. And I think I've been beating that point pretty hard already in our webinar, but I'll emphasize it again because I see so many people that make this mistake with NSF. They will talk about this being just the next step in the development of their innovation, or we are taking an existing proven concept and adapting it to a new application. Again, you're showing, in my opinion, to NSF that this is merely evolutionary, merely incremental. And you say, well, that's not really true. It's really not incremental. Then don't say it is. Don't say you're just modifying an existing proven concept to fit a new need. Phrase it differently. Write it in a way that says this is a new project, a new product that we are developing. Second thing they don't want, straightforward engineering efforts with little technical risk. So two words you want to avoid there are straightforward. I cringe when I see people say things like straightforward, obvious, simple, slam dunk, anything like that that suggests that this is not going to be a very difficult thing to accomplish. And anything that says the risk is small or easily managed. That's not what you say in SBIR, STTR to NSF. You might say that to other customers, showing them that they're not risking much by hiring you to do something, but NSF is hiring you to do high-level, highly risky technology that may fail, and they want to hear that is the case, and even an explanation of why it's risky. Evaluation or testing of existing products. I think that ought to be pretty obvious given the first point up there. They don't want. I had a project like this. This was many years ago. I had a project where basically this company had come up with it was an agricultural product. I'm sorry, let me say this. It was a gardening product, and it was selling like hotcakes. It was just the greatest thing since sliced bread. But they admitted they had no idea why the thing worked. They had just kind of fallen upon it to discover that it had great potential as a gardening product. And so they were coming back and asking for SBIR to now prove why it works. What is the real science behind it? NSF third bullet basically says, we're not going to fund that. Fourth, basic science, unconnected with any specific market. This is kind of going the opposite direction from the first three bullets. The first three bullets are you doing too small of a risk? Is it too incremental over state of the art? The fourth bullet is, we don't want to fund some real basic science that has no place in the market right now. That is what NSF historically does. And if you look at NSF outside of the SBIR STTR program, that is their bread and butter, is basic science, funding basic science, basic research. That's not what NSF SBIR does. And I think that's why they put it in here, is people who are academics who are accustomed to NSF in an academic environment know it's all about funding really fundamental basic science. That's not at all what their SBIR program is about. Fifth bullet, they don't want to fund business development, market research, sales, and marketing. At one level, that seems to make a lot of sense. The other level, it's confusing, I think, for NSF to tell you that it's really important that you emphasize commercialization and that your project have high commercial potential, and put all this emphasis and attention on commercialization, and then tell you they're not going to fund any activities related to business development, market research, or sales and marketing. By the way, I'll give you an explanation for that as best I understand it. Again, this is a contradiction between NSF as an institution and NSF's SBIR program. So NSF as an institution believes that is a terrible thing to do with research money, is to quote unquote waste it on something like market research and business development. So NSF as a big federal bureaucracy believes that its money should not be spent on such things as business development, market research. NSF SBIR office and the SBIR program more generally says you need to work on the commercialization side of your technology. You need to understand the customer. You need to understand competition. You need to have financial projections to see if this thing makes any financial sense whatsoever. So you're caught between a rock and a hard place where NSF will not fund it because of their institutional attitude, but you're expected to do it based on the SBIR office and the SBIR program expecting it. So two things you can do to pay for those things. One is using your fee that you will charge as part of this $275K. Without getting too deep into this, basically out of the $275K, you can charge, you can allocate about $15,000 of that money for fee or profit. And fee or profit has no strings attached to it. You can do whatever you want to with it. And therefore you could take that $15,000 and devote that towards business development and market research. Second thing is NSF allows on phase 1 projects what they call the beat the odds boot camp. Boot the odds beat camp, I guess. So it's beat the odds boot camp. And you can devote between $10,000 and $20,000 of your phase 1 NSF grant to participating in this boot camp. And this boot camp is similar to the I-Corps we were describing a while ago, where you get some training in customer discovery, talking to potential customers, competitors, et cetera. You get some money for that training, and you also get some money to actually go out and do some of that customer discovery. So those are two sources of money for business development market research within NSF, but you don't want to put into your work plan and into your what you're going to do in terms of section 3 of the project pitch. You don't want to be putting in that you're going to spend money on market research, not spend NSF's money on market research. Clinical trials. For some reason, NSF does not want to support clinical trials. So if you have a life science project and a clinical trial is going to be required in phase 1 to prove feasibility, then NSF would not be the right agency to be submitting that proposal to. And then the last bullet is a long, drawn out bureaucratic way of saying, I believe they don't want to fund things related to medicinal use of marijuana and its components. Maybe there's more to it, but that's my interpretation of what they're saying. So in your project pitch, do not pitch any of these things or use terminology like evolutionary or incremental or modification, straightforward. Be careful to not use even the terminology shown in this list of things they don't want to fund. Another thing you want to be aware of, and I had an interesting this pitch I was reviewing earlier today. They fell into this problem. I've told you NSF has 12 different program officers, directors, and between the 12 of them, they cover all 30 topics, suggesting then that each program officer has between 2 and 3 topics they're responsible for. Well, some of these 12 program officer directors at NSF have concluded, erroneously, I believe, but have concluded that SBIR, STTR funding should only be money for startups or early stage companies. And they have taken the attitude that if you are a more mature business, there's no clear definition of what that is, but the example I was given was a 10-year-old company. If you're a more mature business, then they don't think you ought to be getting SBIR funds. Now, I'm telling you this for 2 reasons. One is, if you're a startup company, good for you. You might want to emphasize that in your project pitch, because that speaks to these program officers at NSF who think the money ought to be spent on startups. Versus if you're a more mature business, and that was the problem I was having with the company I was reviewing project pitch for earlier today. If you're a more mature company, then you've got to worry that you're going to get one of these program officers that thinks you should not get SBIR or STTR funding because you're not a startup or an early stage company. If you fall into the latter category, one thought that you might consider is, can you present this as a new venture for your company, or a new division that will be created, or a new department, so that you could argue that even though our company maybe is 10 years old, the portion of our company pursuing this innovation is new, is not well funded, is in startup mode. And maybe they would buy off on that. I don't know. I will tell you the majority of the program officer directors at NSF who buy into this idea that SBIR, STTR is money for startups and early stage companies are the program officers over the health and life sciences. So I think you'll see it more prevalent there than you might see under other topics. But I want you to be aware of this, because it could affect your your project pitch. And these poor people earlier today, I'm reviewing their pitch, fortunately before they've submitted it, but they're basically describing that they're a more mature business and they're generating, I think it was $10 million a year off of one of their other innovative products. And of course, they're trying to brag about their ability to commercialize. But what I was seeing was, and it was a life science project, I was seeing that they may very well be shooting themselves in the foot in terms of the NSF program officer director over that topic, saying, well, you're not a startup, and when you're generating 10 million in revenue, you don't need any of this little piddly 275K phase ones from NSF, so we're going to reject your project pitch. Electronic submission, this is, you go, do I have to get all registered before I submit the pitch? No, you do not. You don't have to have any registrations accomplished with the federal government to present a pitch to NSF. But if you're going to propose to NSF, and obviously that's why you're putting in a pitch, is you're hoping to get an invitation so you can submit a proposal, then you are going to need to get some registrations done. And those registrations at NSF are listed up above here. They're actually, what have I got? I've got 6 different registrations you're going to have. So the first one is the employer identification number, which maybe you've already got that. That's the one that the IRS, I believe, assigns. Then you need a unique entity identifier, or UEI, which is what the federal government is now using instead of your DNB or Dun and Bradstreet number. You need to be registered on SAM, which is a system-wide area management system at the federal government. It's the most painful part of the registration process, both in terms of the amount of time for you to fill out all the forms, plus the weeks that it can take for SAM to actually approve your registration. Grants.gov. Well, no, wait a minute. We don't need that. We don't need grants.gov for NSF. So scratch that off. In fact, I'm going to correct that right now. I'm going to take grants.gov out of there. That is not required for NSF. They do not use grants.gov. All right. So it's research. You got 5. Wow, only 5 registrations. Well, lucky you guys. The employer identification number, the unique entity identifier, SAM, and then you need to register on what's called research.gov, and then also register on SBIR.gov. And you're thinking, why do I have to do all these separate registrations? Why aren't they combined? What's wrong with the federal government? You're right, guys, you shouldn't have to do all these registrations, but the reality is you do. So it's the golden rule. The federal government has the gold right now, so they're making the rules. And the rule here is you got to register at 5 different places if you want to be able to submit your NSF proposal. Now, why am I suggesting that you do this now when you're worried about this project pitch? Because it can take SAM, as I said, weeks to process and approve your registration request. So if you're trying to shoot for July 5th with your NSF proposal, you need to have SAM registration started now so that you have assurance that you have it in place before July 5th. I'd hate to see you have everything done on July 5th, but not have SAM registration, and that prevents you from uploading the proposal and therefore having to make your proposal sit out until the next window, meaning it won't be considered for review before November, middle of November. So just get these things done and out of the way. All right, so I'm kind of coming down to the last of my comments. What I would like to do is mention how I'm available as a resource through Evelyn's program, and then open it for questions. If you are an Alaska-based company, you may be eligible for having me review your draft project pitch to NSF before you finalize and submit it. Now, if that sounds interesting to you, You want to contact Evelyn, and I've given you her email address there. She will be determining, how many of these that can be done given her funding levels and priorities and so on. I would suggest at the same time you're confirming with Evelyn, you might want to confirm with me that you're interested in doing this so that I get your name on my list, because I have a lot of people requesting pitches right now, pitch reviews, and need to get you on that list if you're interested. By doing so, I'll email back to you once I've heard from Evelyn. Great, Evelyn says I can do a review for you. Can you get your review to me by April 28th? And you might say, no, couldn't possibly do it by April 28th, but I could do it by May 28th. Well, then you and I will iterate a couple of times and decide on a date by which you need to get me your draft. And I will take your draft, and I want to receive it in Word format, because I will literally do some suggestions for edits that might save you some words, because remember, all the sections have word limits. And oftentimes I will suggest that you need to add something. There's something that's not been explained or not clear. Well, that's going to mean you're probably going to need to cut back on some other things. So I will suggest some edits that might save you some words. I'll do the review. I'll mark it up with my comments, and I'll shoot it back to you via email so you have my comments in writing, but quickly as possible. I will caution you though, I'm not a rubber stamper of project pitches or proposals for that matter. If I review it, I will give it my best shot in terms of suggesting things that might make it a better pitch and maybe give it a better chance of success with NSF. So example from earlier today, I was reviewing a pitch and they're telling me they're a more mature business and there's really not much risk in their project. And what I came down to was, unless you can convince me there's more risk and or convince me that you have some need for startup capital when you're a more mature business, then I think your pitch has very little chance of being accepted and lead to an invitation by NSF. So I'm willing to make that sort of harsh claim because I want you to succeed, and I'm not going to help you if I just tell you how marvelous you are and don't worry about it. It's a great idea, and then you get blown out of the water by NSF when you do submit it. So with that, Evelyn, let me turn it back to you and see if we have questions. Maybe I can.
Thank you, Jim. We do have a few questions,
Okay.
and I guess we could start from the ones that just pop up right now from the registrations that I think it's important that people understand. What about Fastlane?
Fastlane was the system that NSF had used for many years for electronic submission of proposal. They decided within this past year to abandon Fastlane and go to something called research.gov. And so they're phasing it out. And currently, if you are submitting a proposal, not your pitch, that's a separate item, but if you're going to submit a full proposal under NSF's SBIR STTR program, then they're going to want you to use research.gov. So that's why I've got that in my list of registrations that you need to do. I am not that familiar with research.gov to give you a synopsis of how I think it's better or inferior to Fastlane or how it differs. So I'm not in a position to do that, but do know that Fastlane has been used for years. You're going to hear it used by a lot of people just because they're familiar with it being used for so long, but it's no longer going to be used for submission of NSF, SBIR, STTR proposals. Your pitch will go in under you log on a separate website and you put your pitch in through that website. So you don't have to have the registrations and it doesn't involve Fastlane or research.gov.
We have a question. I just want to clarify, if you have a nonprofit, this is not your entity that you use to apply for SBIR. SBIRs need to be for-profit entities. They need to be LLCs, corporations, etc. So no award will be going to a nonprofit.
Correct. Yeah, you can be a subcontractor or a consultant and be nonprofit. That's okay, but the applicant themselves must be a for-profit small business, again, meeting that definition of 500 or fewer employees. So that is correct. And for some reason, Evelyn, I hear this quite often where people say, oh yeah, STTR is the program where the university applies. No, it isn't. STTR is small business technology transfer. It still has to be a small business applying. Now it has to team with the university, but the university is a subcontractor to the small business. And I think people have a hard time imagining that, where your little two-person business can actually be the prime, and the University of Alaska, for example, could be your subcontractor, but that's the relationship which will exist in STTR.
Another question is, when we were talking about the budgeting of the of marketing and commercialization plans for NSF, the option of the boot camp, is that still something mandatory as optional expenditures? It doesn't sound like it.
They highly recommend it. They do not require it. They highly recommend it. My conclusion is you do it, because they are very proud of I-Corps. They think you should have gone through I-Corps. Maybe you didn't have the chance to go through I-Corps. So we're going to create this boot camp, which is kind of a mini I-Corps. Don't you want to go through I-Corps? And so when you say no, then again, you're basically saying, NSF, you don't know what you're doing. You shouldn't have I-Corps. It's a dumb idea. I don't want to do it. I don't need it. All negative things. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is I have been very pleased with the outcome from I-Corps and from the boot camp of applicants really getting a true understanding of the market potential of their innovation. A lot of people go into these customer discovery opportunities pretty firm in their mind what the market opportunity is and what the customer wants. And they then sit down and talk with some customers and realize what the customer actually wants is not what they thought they wanted. And they get their eyes opened. And that is a really important eye opener before you get too far into your SBIR project and start investing in things that you think the customer wants when the customer doesn't want them.
And then, Jim, I think I would like to share with you this quick pitch from one of our participants, and he's describing his idea. And it says, integrating XR technology with an instructional design that is based on E4 cognitive science and artificial intelligence in order to revolutionize the way education works, especially in rural and remote communities in Alaska and across America. Is this close to what NSF would consider?
I would say there's two comments I would make. And again, I am a NSF reviewer. I'm not a program officer making decisions on project pitches. And there are 12 different ones, and they all have different personalities and different biases and preferences. So it's hard to say yes, no, but I think generally the idea sounds innovative. I think you need to explain what the risks are in whether it's going to work or not, and how you're going to overcome those risks in phase one, or at least determine whether you can overcome them in phase one. And by the way, in some cases in phase one, you prove you can't overcome the risk, you can't solve the problem, And that's not a failure of an SBIR. It just means your project doesn't go beyond phase one. The other comment I would make about this description that you read, I'm seeing AI on everything. Everybody is talking artificial intelligence right now. And I think if you're not careful, you can get kind of written off as, oh yeah, here's another AI project. And they never get beyond that. It's just like, geez, everybody's doing AI. There's another AI project. And they don't get down below that to see what the real meat of the project is, or what the real value of the project is. So if I were you, I would play down the AI part, certainly in describing how it's going to work. Yes, you explain that AI is a very important component in this working, if it's going to work. But don't put that at the cornerstone right up front, as so many people say, this project is based on using AI to do so and so. There's just too many people right now that are slinging the AI term around, and I think it's getting pretty worn in places like NSF right now.
Thank you, Jim. I think this is very valuable feedback. And
Good.
a final question, what type of entities are eligible to be an actual sub-awardee versus a contractor or a consultant?
Sub-awardee is, there's several categories here. The broad categories are consultant versus subcontractor. On an STTR, when you designate the university, federal lab, or other nonprofit that's going to be your partner on an STTR, they are given a term, a title of RI, or research institution. They're still a subcontractor, if you will, but that's the special terminology that's used, I think, to distinguish that they're meeting that requirement for a partner on an STTR. The federal government does not agree on the difference between consultant versus subcontractor. Let me tell you my simple differentiation. I treat an individual as a consultant, versus if it's an entity, and that can be a company, a university, a federal lab. If it's an entity, then I treat that as a subcontractor, sub-awardee. Again, that's just one definition distinguishing the two. I have seen other definitions where the consultant is not really doing any work. They're only advising on approach. And to me, that's too limiting of what you would say about a consultant. So my distinction is consultant would be an individual, subcontractor is an entity. Your question or answer might be, who cares? What's the why does it matter? It turns out on your proposal, not on your project pitch, but on your proposal to NSF, if you're treating somebody as a consultant, you can just have their budget included as a line item in your overall project budget. But if you're treating someone or something as a subcontractor, then they have to have their own budget as a sub budget to yours. So it's more effort, if you will, for the sub-awardee to put their information into your proposal than it is for a consultant. But for an STTR, where you have the university, you will have to treat them as a subcontractor. And again, their designation is they're the research institution.
Thank you, Jim. I want to make sure that we got all the questions, and I think we do have some leg room here for a couple of minutes. Oh, actually, it's 1:30. My apologies. We are on time. If you want to submit a project pitch, please do let me know. And based on what Jim shared with us today, it does make sense to do it relatively soon based on the timeline of the windows of submission. If we are hoping to send a proposal this summer. If not, do consider that second window of submission that will be looking at the fall of this year. And thank you very much for joining. I'm going to stop the recording and thank you. See you soon.
Thank you, Evelyn. Appreciate everybody. Good luck.